World War I, also known as the Great War, was a global conflict that engulfed Europe and beyond from 1914 to 1918. It was a war that would change the face of the world forever, leaving a legacy that still resonates today. It was a war unlike any before it, marked by unprecedented bloodshed, technological advancements in warfare, and far-reaching consequences that continue to shape our world today. The introduction of new weapons such as machine guns, tanks, and chemical warfare brought about a level of destruction and horror that was previously unimaginable. The world watched in disbelief as the stability of Europe, built over centuries, crumbled in the face of fervent nationalism, imperial ambitions, and a tangled web of alliances. Leaders who once dined together now found themselves on opposite sides of a brutal conflict, driven by a complex mix of pride, fear, and ambition. This war, once thought unthinkable, would forever alter the course of human history. Families were torn apart as young men marched off to fight, many never to return. The declarations of war, splashed across newspapers, signaled the beginning of a nightmare that would last for years. The term Great War was used initially because of the sheer scale of the conflict. It was a war that involved millions of soldiers and spanned multiple continents, making it unlike any conflict the world had seen before. It involved more nations, soldiers, and casualties than any previous war. The mobilization of entire populations for the war effort meant that the impact was felt not just on the front lines, but in every home and community. The entire world seemed to be drawn into the vortex of violence. Cities were bombed, landscapes were scarred, and the very fabric of society was tested to its limits. The vast battlefields, stretching from the trenches of France to the plains of Eastern Europe, bore witness to unimaginable carnage. Soldiers lived and died in the mud, facing constant danger from enemy fire, disease, and the harsh elements. Millions of soldiers and civilians perished, leaving an indelible scar on the consciousness of a generation. The loss of life was staggering, and the psychological impact on those who survived was profound. The war was initially a European conflict, but it quickly escalated into a global war. Alliances and treaties pulled more and more countries into the fray, each bringing their own troops and resources to the battle. Countries from every inhabited continent were eventually involved, drawn into the conflict by their alliances or imperial ambitions. Colonial troops from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East fought alongside European soldiers, adding to the global nature of the war. It was a true world war, with battles fought not only in Europe but also in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The deserts of Africa, the jungles of Asia, and the ancient lands of the Middle East all became battlegrounds in this unprecedented conflict. This global conflict had a profound impact on the course of the 20th century. The aftermath of the war saw political upheaval, revolutions, and the rise of new ideologies that would shape the future of nations. It led to the collapse of empires, the redrawing of national borders, and the rise of new ideologies. Monarchies that had stood for centuries fell, and new nations were born from the ashes of the old order. The seeds of future conflicts, including World War II, were sown in the ashes of the Great War. The treaties and decisions made in the aftermath of the war set the stage for future turmoil, as the world struggled to rebuild and find a new path forward. At the heart of this global conflict were two main alliances, the Central Powers and the Allies. The Central Powers, initially composed of Germany and Austria-Hungary, were later joined by the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria. Germany, with its powerful military and industrial might, emerged as the leading force within this formidable alliance. Austria-Hungary, a sprawling empire grappling with internal ethnic tensions, sought to assert its dominance in the Balkans. The Allied powers, on the other hand, were led by France, Russia, and Great Britain. These three nations formed the Triple Entente, a counterbalance to the growing strength of Germany and Austria-Hungary. France, still smarting from its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871, sought to regain its lost territories of Alsace-Lorraine. Russia, eager to expand its influence in the Balkans, saw itself as the protector of Slavic peoples. Great Britain, with its vast global empire, was determined to maintain the balance of power in Europe. As the war progressed, other nations joined the fray, each with its own unique motivations and objectives. Italy, initially allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary, switched sides in 1915, enticed by promises of territorial gains. Japan, seeking to expand its influence in Asia, joined the Allied side and seized German colonies in the Pacific. The Ottoman Empire, once a formidable power, entered the war on the side of the Central Powers, hoping to regain lost territories and reassert its influence in the Middle East.
The seeds of the Great War were sown in the decades leading up to 1914. The world was changing rapidly, and Europe was at the center of this transformation. The continent was a patchwork of powerful empires and emerging nations, each vying for dominance and influence. A complex interplay of factors including nationalism, imperialism, militarism, and a tangled web of alliances created a volatile atmosphere ripe for conflict. These elements did not exist in isolation but were deeply interconnected, each one feeding into and exacerbating the others. Nationalism, the fervent belief in the superiority of one's own nation and its interests, was a powerful force sweeping across Europe in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This sense of national pride often turned into a belief that one's nation was destined for greatness, leading to aggressive foreign policies and a disdain for diplomatic solutions. This intense patriotism often manifested as rivalry and suspicion towards other nations, fueling an arms race and creating a climate of fear and mistrust. Countries began to see their neighbors not as partners in peace but as potential threats that needed to be countered with military might. Imperialism, the pursuit of building empires by acquiring colonies and expanding territories, was another major contributor to the outbreak of war. European powers were driven by a desire to control more land, resources, and people, believing that their nation's strength was directly tied to the size of their empire. European powers, driven by economic and political ambitions, competed fiercely for control of colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. This competition was not just about land but also about prestige and power, as each nation sought to prove its superiority on the global stage. This scramble for colonies created tensions and rivalries that often spilled over into Europe. The quest for empire was a zero-sum game, where one nation's gain was seen as another's loss, leading to a series of confrontations and crises. Militarism, the glorification of military strength and the belief that war is a necessary and even desirable aspect of international relations, also played a crucial role. This ideology was deeply ingrained in the political and social fabric of many European nations, where military leaders were often celebrated as national heroes. European nations poured vast sums of money into building up their armies and navies, creating a climate of fear and suspicion. The arms race was not just about preparing for war, but also about demonstrating power and deterring potential adversaries. Military leaders gained increasing influence in government, and the prospect of war, once unthinkable, became a real possibility. The belief that military solutions were preferable to diplomatic ones led to a hardening of attitudes and a readiness to resort to force. The alliance system, a complex web of treaties and agreements between nations, further exacerbated tensions and made it almost impossible to contain the crisis once it erupted. These alliances were intended to provide security, but often had the opposite effect, binding nations to the actions of their allies. These alliances, intended to deter aggression and maintain peace, ironically had the opposite effect. They created a situation where a conflict involving one nation could quickly escalate into a full-scale war involving many others. When one nation declared war, its allies were obligated to come to its aid, creating a domino effect that drew the entire continent into the conflict. The intricate web of alliances turned a regional dispute into a global catastrophe, setting the stage for the unprecedented destruction of the Great War. The spark that ignited the powder keg of Europe came on June 28, 1914, with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie in Sarajevo, Bosnia. This event is often cited as the immediate cause of World War I, but it was the culmination of years of mounting tensions and rivalries among the great powers of Europe. The assassination was carried out by Gavrilo Princip, a young Serbian nationalist associated with the Black Hand, a secret society committed to unifying all Serbs under Serbian rule. Princip and his co-conspirators saw the Archduke as a symbol of oppressive Austro-Hungarian rule over the Slavic peoples in the Balkans. Austria-Hungary, blaming Serbia for the assassination, issued an ultimatum with a series of harsh demands. The ultimatum was designed to be unacceptable, giving Austria-Hungary a pretext to go to war with Serbia. The demands included allowing Austro-Hungarian officials to participate in the investigation and suppress anti-Austrian propaganda. Serbia, backed by its ally Russia, refused to comply with all the demands. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of Slavic nations, was determined to support Serbia against Austro-Hungarian aggression. This refusal set the stage for a broader conflict. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, setting in motion the chain reaction of alliances that would plunge Europe into war. The declaration of war was met with widespread mobilization across Europe. Russia, honoring its alliance with Serbia, began mobilizing its troops. This mobilization was seen as a direct threat by Germany, which had its own alliance with Austria-Hungary. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, viewed the Russian mobilization as a threat and declared war on Russia on August 1, 1914. Germany's military strategy, known as the Schlieffen Plan, called for a quick victory over France before turning to the Eastern Front against Russia. 2 days later, Germany declared war on France, Russia's ally, and invaded neutral Belgium to bypass the heavily fortified French border. The invasion of Belgium brought Great Britain into the war due to its treaty obligations to defend Belgian neutrality. Great Britain, obligated by its treaty with Belgium, declared war on Germany on August 4, 1914. The British entry into the war marked the beginning of a truly global conflict, as British colonies and dominions around the world were also drawn into the fighting. Within a week, the major powers of Europe were at war. The complex web of alliances and treaties had turned a regional conflict into a full-scale world war, involving nations from across the globe. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the immediate trigger for the war, but the underlying causes ran much deeper. The tensions that had been building for decades finally erupted into violence. Nationalism, imperialism, militarism, and the alliance system had created a climate of tension and mistrust in Europe, making war almost inevitable. Each nation was eager to assert its dominance and protect its interests, leading to an arms race and a series of diplomatic crises. The assassination was merely the spark that ignited the powder keg. The volatile mix of national ambitions, military preparations, and interlocking alliances ensured that once the conflict began, it would be difficult to contain. The world was about to witness a war on an unprecedented scale, reshaping the political landscape for generations to come.